Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you some book boyfriends that the protagonist forgave, but I never did. So I feel like in real life, I am someone who very much does hold grudges, and I very much do not necessarily forget when somebody actually did something wrong to me or messed up or something like that. I do have a hard time letting go. The thing is that in books, that is not necessarily the case. Usually I'll read a book, and if one of the characters piss me off, I'll usually get over it, especially by the end of the book once they've already made up whatever it is that they messed up for, if that makes sense. But happens to be there are a couple of occasions when book boyfriends messed up so bad, and I personally have never forgiven them, even if by the end of the book I'm kind of content with what happened because they've groveled enough or however it worked out, it was fine by the end. I still hold a very big grudge towards these characters, and that is why today I wanted to share with you a handful of books where this basically happened to me, where years later I've read these books, and anytime that I see them online I still get upset when I come across the memories of these characters. I will say that, first of all, I did not come up with this idea. This idea in general has been around for a while. I have seen YouTube videos for the past couple of years with this general idea of book boyfriends that people hate or things along those lines, and happens to be, I feel I specifically wanted to make this video now because I feel recently there has been a trend on book talk about this where people have just been lately doing this over and over again. It's been all over my For You page, and that is kind of what has pushed me to make this video now, because technically I've been collecting these books for years. None of the books that I'm sharing with you today are necessarily recent reads, but I will say that this video is going to be very spoiler filled. So if you haven't read any of these books, you might not want to hear what I have to say about them, because the things that I have to talk about are very big spoilers, because obviously the character had to have messed up at some point for me to have talked about it. You know what I mean? So in case you don't want to hear about specific books, if you haven't read them or anything like that and you don't want to hear spoilers, I will have a timestamp in the description below for each book that I'm talking about. So you can skip around if you have read one of the books or you haven't, or whatever it is that you want to do. There's timestamps down below. This video is going to be fully spoilered. I warned you, do with that what you will. So with that said, let's get into my first book. So I very specifically wanted to put this book first because this is actually the book that had got me back into reading, and it gave me so many emotions at the time that I read it. And honestly, I literally can tear up right now with all of the bad feelings that I have towards this series, even though somehow I loved it at the time. I 100% would not have loved it as much if I read it now, but at the time that I read it, it was just the perfect time to read it in my life. But either way, I have never forgiven actually both of the main male characters in this series, and that series is This Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. So this is a collection of 3 books. I should have said I'm not telling you what all these books are about because they're spoilers. I would assume that you have read them if you're watching these videos, but basically Jeremiah and Connor, or Conrad, I have not forgiven Jeremiah and Conrad. I have not forgiven either one of them for the things that they did. Yes, I am a Conrad stan. I never really liked Jeremiah, but happens to be in the 3rd book when Jeremiah messed up, my heart sinks every single time that I think about it. And no matter what you say or what anybody says, because I have seen both sides of people standing up for Jeremiah, saying that they weren't really together, so we never did anything wrong. I do not care. He did something wrong in my eyes, and I very much will never forgive him. The fact that they were broken up for a minute and then he goes and sleeps with someone else, even though Belly was virgin and everything like that. I'm sorry, but if that was actually to you, I would feel so freaking betrayed. It's the second that we break up, you just have to go and have sex with somebody because you couldn't wait it out for me, but you love me so much that you could come back and then propose to me and want to spend the rest of your life with me. I'm sorry, but that does not make sense to me, and I will never, ever, ever forgive him for doing that. And yes, I know that it was very out of character for him. I have seen so many people try to stand up for him and be well, he never really would have done that in the 1st and the 2nd book, but in the 3rd book, they had to make it work out for Connor at the end. I don't care what the author had to do to make the story work out the way that she wanted to. At the end of the day, in my eyes, Jeremiah betrayed Belly, and I will never, ever, ever forgive him for what he did in this book. The thing is that I do very much love Conrad, even though I will not forgive him for everything that he did in these 2 books. All of the times he messed up, specifically in book 2. I feel he messed up a lot in book 1, but in book 2 at the funeral when he basically was getting pet, what did he say? They remember that thing that happened in the basement with Belly walking in and then her getting really hurt. I was so freaking hurt for Belly in that moment, and when he had ditched her at the prom and broke up with her, and literally every single time that he messed up, he was basically a horrible boyfriend in these 2 books, and I will never forgive him for the shitty things that he did, even though by the end of this book, yeah, I somehow fell in love with him. But I will say that in general, these 2 book boyfriends in this series, they just were not very good people, and I will forever hold grudges against them, and that is all all I'm gonna say about that. Another character that I'm never going to forgive is Ben from November 9 by Colleen Hoover. So I've said multiple times on my channel how I'm not really a Colleen Hoover fan. I have read a couple of her books, and those books are the ones that made me decide that I don't really like her style. Even though I do think that her books are good for what they were. I just don't like putting myself through those type of things. Like, I do think that her writing style, it's very easy to consume. It's very basic, and that is why her books are so easy to just like fly through and everything like that. And I feel like in the moment that I read every single one of her books, I actually did enjoy them, which is really weird because the second that I put them down and then I sleep on them, I go back and think and I'm like, wait, I really did not like this and this and this that this character did. So why did I actually enjoy the books in the moment? And anyway, happens to be in this book specifically, that is very much how I felt about this book, because I really did enjoy it when I read it. But then after the fact, I'm like, wait, but like he did this and he did this and he did this. And I 100% do not agree with all of those things. So why did I like this book? And basically that is why I actually very much do hate Ben. So first of all, the big thing about the story, which is the main idea, is the fact that Ben had lied to her the entire time and that it was actually his fault of why she was in that fire and everything like that. And I 100% will never forgive somebody who starts a relationship on a lie. Yes, sometimes in specific situations, I will get over it based off of like how the entire story is laid out. But I happen to think that the way that this book specifically was laid out, I will not forgive him. Like, if he can lie to you for that amount of time, then how can you ever trust him in like after the fact? Like, if he lied to you once, he can lie to you again. And the way that he lied to her the entire time throughout this book, I just would never ever trust him in the future. And like, then why would I like him? And therefore I very much do hold a grudge against the fact that he did exactly what he did throughout the entire time of this book. And then happens to be on top of that, on a smaller scale, I will never ever forgive him for actually starting to date his his ex-sister-in-law, whatever you want to call it. Like, that whole situation, that 1 year when that moment took place where he wasn't really available because he was going out with his dead brother's wife or whatever you want to call it. I basically absolutely hated that, and I will never forgive him for that. Like, yeah, he technically didn't do anything wrong, but I very much felt betrayed by it, the same way that I felt betrayed the way that Jeremiah had slept with someone else when they were on a break or whatever you want to call it. So basically, anytime that I think about that moment, my heart just absolutely sinks, and I will never forgive him for what he did in this book. So I very much do not like Ben as a book boyfriend. I don't know why I ever thought that I liked this book, but basically every single thing about it, I just absolutely hate. So that is my take on November 9 and Ben by Colleen Hoover. So next up, I wanted to share the Ravenhood series by Kate Stewart. So yes, this is a series that I've said multiple times how I'm a really big fan of, and I know that this sounds very condescending because if you didn't forgive the book boyfriends, then how could you be a really big fan of the series? And don't really ask me that, because I honestly have no idea. I still love the series. I still stand by it. I still think that it is a great read, but I never really forgave Tobias and Sean for what they did throughout the story, even though I kind of liked Tobias by the end of the third book, and I still really liked him and Cecilia together, if that makes sense. But we're not really going to try to analyze my thoughts in this book, because at the end of the day, I still hold grudges against Sean and Tobias, and let me tell you why. So first of all, at the end of book 1, when Sean and Dom basically pushed Cecilia away, I was very, very hurt by that, and I didn't really like how all of that went down. But I don't hold a grudge against Dom for some reason, because I don't think that was a really, really, really big deal, even though I'm not really a fan of third act breakups, I'm pushing you away to save you sort of thing. I don't like how that goes down, but I don't really hold a huge grudge against that. But that was kind of the beginning of the end for me and Sean, if that makes sense. I let Dom go in that situation, but then when we get into book 2, and then all of a sudden Sean comes in, and specifically at the the second half of this book, when Sean basically ends up going out with that girl that works in that store, and he ends up marrying her and kind of moving on from it, Cecilia, and being oh, I don't know why I ever really liked you, you were too much of a hassle for me and everything like that, and whatever, I'm he no longer loves her. I never forgave him for basically moving on, and I know that that makes no sense, but basically I was always butthurt by the idea of Sean moving on in the second half of this story, and I feel I want to blame him for the things that happened at the end of book 1 and the way that everything went down throughout the first half of this book with him and Cecilia. Every single move that he made, I basically started resenting him more and more and more, and then in the second half of this book, when all of a sudden he was married all of those years later, all of a sudden I decided that I absolutely hate him, and no, I do not ever forgive him for basically moving on with his life, and that makes absolutely no sense, but it's still how I feel. The thing is that I even more hate Tobias for everything that he did in the second half of this book. Literally the entire second half of this story, I hate Tobias's guts for, the fact that he moved on with another girl. Well, he didn't really move on, but the fact that he started dating another girl, the fact that he never went back for Cecilia, the fact that he kind of just like tried to forget about her and then thought that like he could come back into like, you know, her life and like make it up to her. And yes, we have the entire book 3 where he grovels and does that. And that's kind of why I somewhat forgave him, but I still hold a grudge against him for everything that he did in the second half of this book. So either way, yeah, I really like my heart sinks every time that I think about everything that happened in this story. And it's not just about the thing that happened with Dom. Like the entire second half of this book literally like makes my stomach like churn into a bunch of knots, and I have to blame that on Tobias and Sean, and I never really will get over the things that happened in the second half of this book specifically, and that is why I'm adding Tobias and Sean onto my book boyfriend list that I will never forgive, even though I do like Tobias at the end of book 3. So yes, this does not make a lot of sense, but I'm saying what I'm saying, and we're just gonna move on from that. I feel like I said at the beginning of this video that none of the books I'm sharing with you today were actually recent reads of mine, and I was wrong about that because this next book I did recently read, and that is Give Me More by Sarah Kate. So in this book, I never really forgave Hunter for what he did at the end of this story. So at the end of it, he basically has to figure out like what he wants to do with like this poly relationship that he decided to make with his wife and his best friend, and he kind of is very confused and he has to like figure some stuff out for himself. So he decides to go away for, I think it was like 2 months or so, and just figure himself out while he leaves his wife with his best friends, like do whatever they want to do. And I just very much did not like how that went down, and I would never forgive my husband if he did something like that. Like, no, I would never really get myself into this situation, but like theoretically, the fact that he did what he did, I never ever ever would forgive somebody for doing that to me, if that makes sense. Like if I was in a relationship with someone and he just decides to like go away for months at a time to figure himself out without actually like sitting with me and letting us talk it out and figuring it out together and everything like that, like I just think that that was a very, very, very wrong move, and I never really forgave him for what he did. Like he came back and yeah, he like made it up to them and like now they were all happy at the end of the book, but like I wasn't happy at the end of the book. Like you pissed me off so freaking much that no, I did not forgive you by the end of it. And honestly, that is kind of a very big thing that ended up pulling my feelings towards this book down. And yeah, I didn't really like him throughout all of the book. Like I didn't like a lot of the moves he made and the way that he kind of like toyed with both of the other characters in the story. And I feel like it was just something that was slowly building up. And then when we got to the end of the book and that whole thing happened, it kind of all combusted in my head. I'm like, oh my God, nope, I hate him and I really don't like him and I'm not going to forgive him for everything that he did. So kind of more or less throughout this book, I wasn't really a huge fan of Hunter. He was my least favorite character, even though he was kind of the most important one because he was the one like orchestrating this entire story. But basically my point is that even though both of the characters ended up forgiving Hunter for what he did throughout the story, I personally never did. And the last book boyfriend that I wanted to share with you that I personally will never forgive for everything that he's done is Tamlin from the ACOTAR series. So this is obviously a very popular opinion that like nobody really likes Tamlin because he has messed up multiple times. I'm not even gonna bother like saying every single thing, but literally like all of the stuff that he did at the end of this book, like Under the Mountain and everything like that in the beginning of book 2, obviously he messed up left and right, and that is why Feyre eventually did leave him. So obviously, yeah, he doesn't really deserve a redemption, and why would I forgive him for everything that he's done? Even though Feyre, I feel like, did eventually somewhat forgive him, and I really don't blame her for that because at the end of the day, it's like, don't you want to be happy and just move on with your life? Like you have to let it go at some point. So I really don't blame her for kind of like forgiving him eventually. But I will say that I've seen a lot of people online say how they really hope that Tamlin one day gets a redemption, and that it's possible that like him and Elaine might even end up together because like Elaine has like all the flowers and she would be really good in the spring court. So maybe one day like they're gonna end up as a couple or something like that. Like I've seen so many theories online, and I understand the thought process of where these people are coming from when they come up with these like crazy ideas, but I personally hope that Tamlin never really gets a redemption. I feel like it's okay to just have somewhat of a villain, someone who kind of just like got left on the side because he messed up and he's just never going to like, you know, actually make himself better or anything like that. And I kind of hope that that is where Tamlin more or less stays. Like, yeah, maybe he can like, you know, redeem himself a little bit, but I really don't hope that he gets a happily ever after because I don't think that he personally deserves it. And I feel like it will kind of somewhat counteract everything that happened throughout the beginning of this series if one day he somehow does get a redemption and like a happily ever after of sorts. So I don't really want to get too into it because my head honestly hurts whenever I try to go too deep into like Sarah J. Maas universe and conspiracy theories and everything along those lines. But basically, I've seen a lot of people online say how one day they do hope that like Tamlin ends up getting a redemption and they want to forgive him and everything like that. Sarah J. Maas just needs to give us a reason to forgive him. And I personally am just not on that side where I think that he's never going to deserve forgiveness. And even though Feyre did forgive him somewhat, I think that like, you know, it worked out the way it worked out. He's not the greatest guy and he should just go live his life in the spring court and leave us all alone. So With that said, that is the last book boyfriend that I wanted to share with you that I personally never forgave, even though the protagonist in the story did somewhat forgive them for one reason or another. So with that said, I'm curious if you have any book boyfriends that you personally have never forgiven for the things that they have done, even though the love interest had forgiven them by the end of the story. So leave me a comment down below if you have anything that you wanted to add to this video, or if you have any thoughts that you wanted to share based off of things that I said in today's video. Love to continue the discussion down below. But either way, with that said, if you did enjoy watching this, then please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you are not currently subscribed. And either way, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video, because I really do appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.